Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hello, welcome to the Halloween edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Kimberley Hoeppner, and today is Halloween, October 31st. We're going to have a little bit of fun with the show tonight, so don't forget, when we're not here, you can always get in touch with us by going to weather.gov/Alaska and clicking on the destination of your choice, or you can call our 1-800 number 472-0391. Now let's go on to the headlines of the day. You can read these along with me. You can see that there's spooky winds and snow that are going to be along the eastern Beaufort seacoast, and we're going to get to that on your surface maps in a few minutes. And keep in mind that there's still some creepy freezing drizzle around Fairbanks. We also have some mystical widespread fog across the state, and we've got chilly northerly offshore flow that's going to be sneaking into the southeast as we head into the week. Now let's go into our maps this afternoon that will show you where we have our advisories out. You can see we have an advisory out around the Fairbanks area, and this is for freezing drizzle that we're expecting to continue through Wednesday, 6 a.m. So be careful out there. The roads are going to be slick. Now across the northeastern Beaufort seacoast, we have some advisories up here, and this is for some blowing snow issues. We've got light snow combined with winds out of the east blowing at 45 miles per hour. So this is going to reduce visibilities and cause travel issues, and that's going to continue through 6 a.m. as well on Wednesday. Now let's take a look at those weather patterns that are moving weather across the state. First, we'll take a note along the state. You can see this kind of clockwise flow that's occurring across the western coast, and this is with a ridge building in from the Bering. Now along the northeastern Beaufort seacoast, we do have a plume of moisture there that's helping to bring additional moisture for snow showers that are being generated in the area. For the south central locations, after breaking out of the fog, there were some clearing skies. Now along the west coast and out across the Bering, the ridge, we have the pattern shifting over towards the east, and then we have a low pressure system that's just off of the Kamchatka Peninsula area out west, and this is helping to stream some moisture along a frontal boundary that's stretching up into Kamchatka. Basically, this system is bringing some rain across the area. This system will be breaking up, however, the surface low has moved north and is beginning to weaken. Now, as we look across the state, you can see a large area that has been widespread fog for today. This ridge is bringing a stable air mass across the area, and this is what has caused the setup for the fog. Is the warmer temperatures aloft causes a temperature inversion just off the surface. Now here's the area across the Fairbanks in pink. That's for the freezing drizzle that was occurring this afternoon. They started off as some light snow, but did change over, warmed up enough to be freezing rain this evening. Now across the northern sector, we do have that light snow going along mainly the eastern areas of the Beaufort seacoast, but otherwise we're seeing dry conditions statewide, and we did have a large area that was covered in a blanket of fog this morning as a low exited into the Gulf. Mainly an inverted trough at this time, and there's no precip occurring with that system. It did bring quite a bit of rainfall across the area last night. We did see totals from the last system between 1/2 of it all the way up to 1/2 of an inch across the south central locations. Now as we head into tonight, expect conditions to be very similar to what you're currently experiencing. However, the fog that has lifted during the afternoon hours today, that's going to become a problem, especially across the southwest tonight. Looking at visibility reductions to 1 mile or less at times, especially across the southwest, along the Cook Inlet, and possibly across the Copper River and the central areas of the state. Now we will see clearing conditions across the southeast. However, they're going to see some northerly flow increasing as this tighter gradient sets up. That'll cause some northerly flow to pick up during the overnight hours through the channels, and that should keep fog from forming overnight for the southeast. However, for those of you that are going trick-or-treating tonight, we will be seeing mostly dry conditions across the state. However, you don't want to get lost in that fog, so be safe out there and be sure to bring a buddy. Now, across the northern tier of this state, it's going to just be a cooler air mass, quieter conditions, no winds for the northwest or west coast, and across the Bering locations, mainly some light rain affecting the western waters and the western and central Aleutians. Now let's take a look at your Wednesday weather. We're going to see that rain across the central Aleutians become more widespread as another wave in the upper levels pushes this rain further towards the central Bering waters and towards the Pribilof Islands, possibly some light drizzle heading into that area. And here we go, we're going to start the day Wednesday morning with widespread dense fog in most locations across the southern tier of the state, with possible conditions being fairly dense for central and northern areas as well. So just be alert, that fog is going to be an issue. The light rain drizzle should taper off for Fairbanks as that ridge begins to head towards the eastern border, and then we will also see that drying out occurring along the northeastern Beaufort seacoast. So the main focus for tomorrow with winds is going to be across the southeast. This flow is going to increase and we'll get a surgence from this pressure, which is going to cause some gusty offshore flow all the way across the Panhandle and towards Valdez, Thompson Pass areas. They'll experience northerly flow between 40 to 60 miles per hour. So stay on alert if you are in these areas where offshore flow is common. It will be increasing. We might see some decrease some in time during the morning tomorrow, but as this ridge makes it further towards the eastern border, we will see that resurgence of wind. So when it begins to taper off sometime tomorrow, it will pick up by the afternoon once again, and we'll see that blowing all the way through those southern channels. So that's your Wednesday weather. As we head into Thursday, very similar conditions across the southern tier of the state. Patchy fog might even develop into the northern channels and the Panhandle, depending on how quickly this ridge shoves off to the east. So be aware that you could see some fog as we head into Thursday morning. Now, across much of South Central, the winds are going to be tapering off, and some light rain is going to be spreading back into that western coast. We'll also see areas of snow developing across the northern and western tier of the state. Now let's look across the Bering. We just still have that weak front that's going to continue to diminish, and low pressure is going to be dominant across the Kamchatka Peninsula, swinging yet another weak front over towards Shimia, this time staying all rain. Now let's take a look at the temperatures from today. The temperatures today are going to be dropping overnight, not so much across the Aleutians. We're pretty much seeing temperatures in the 40s, so they might drop into the upper 30s. So not too bad for them. The southwest is primarily going to be near the freezing mark or just below. Across the Gulf Coast, look for temperatures around freezing or just above. In the southeast, a little bit more mild in the mid-30s. Pretty cold across the central interior. With that ridge building across, we should see temperatures going down into the single digits and teens. Across the northern coast, we're seeing temperatures there also drop into the teens and the lower 20s. The northwest will see that little bit of a colder transition towards the Seward Peninsula, with temperatures across the Seward Peninsula in the mid-20s. Now, as we head into Wednesday afternoon, temperatures will warm up nicely across the southwest and south central, mainly getting into the upper 30s and 40s, with the southeast, the warmest expected, into the mid-40s, the coldest across the interior in the teens to mid-20s, and along the coastal locations, expect temperatures to range in the mid-20s to near freezing. Across the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, a mild day out there as well, with temperatures on average in the 40s. As we head into Thursday, we'll see that ridge shifting a little bit further to the east coast. So expect temperatures to be at their coldest along the eastern border of the state. So temperatures will get down into the lower single digits, possibly just below for Arctic Valley. Across the coastal areas along the north, temperatures are going to be dropping into the lower teens to lower 20s. And all the coastal areas will mainly be in the mid-20s along the southwest coast, possibly a few numbers in the mid-30s. Temperatures for the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula range in the mid-30s to lower 40s. And for the coastal areas of the Gulf, expect temperatures to be slightly cooler with that cold air advection for the southeast. Temperatures dropping back to that freezing mark and just below. And that's all for South Central. Kodiak Island will be around 40 degrees Thursday morning. Now, in just a moment, we'll be back with your aviation weather.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Starting off with your not so frightening aviation weather, you can see across much of the state we're going to be large areas of VFR conditions. We are going to see IFR and MVFR conditions across the western Alaska range back down towards Bristol Bay. This is mostly due to morning fog and low stratus hanging along and just north of the mountains here. Also stretching up into the northern coast, we'll see some MVFR and IFR in that zone. Now, across the western areas of the Bering, we'll see mainly MVFR conditions with VFR conditions along the center, IFR conditions skirting the eastern and western perimeter of the Bering. Now, we'll see across the southeastern areas, mainly VFR conditions, except for the MVFR conditions across the central areas of the Gulf. Now, let's take a look at the Wednesday afternoon time frame. We'll see that the skies will be on a clearing trend across the state, so mainly VFR conditions improving for your afternoon. And then looking at some VFR conditions hanging on across Gulf waters, and then for the Bering waters, and large area of IFR conditions stretching along the western perimeter of the Bering. Now across the central and western Aleutians, look for some lower ceilings in that area, and that's not going to improve too much for the Bering as we head into Thursday morning. Now across the west coast, expect MVFR to redevelop all along the west, and then across the Gulf of Alaska, we will see some MVFR ceilings. Now across the interior areas of the state, mainly a VFR day, just a small area of IFR conditions setting up there across Bristol Bay. However, with the ridge building in, we should see more of an offshore flow pattern, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were a few tricky areas out there along like the Cook Inlet where that fog might creep up during the morning hours. Now the offshore flow should be strong enough keeping everything VFR for the southeast. Now let's take a look at your Thursday afternoon. We'll see MVFR and IFR conditions creeping in from the west coast, and conditions along the north coast will be in the MVFR and IFR range as well. Now across much of the Bering, MVFR and IFR conditions will be becoming a little bit more widespread, and here across the western areas of the Gulf of Alaska too, we will see an MVFR day for the afternoon, Thursday. Now let's take a look at the passes in more depth. We'll start with Anaktuvuk Pass, which will be VFR all day, and then Atigun will be MVFR improving to VFR late day. Now Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will start out MVFR and then go to VFR, and we'll see Rainy go MVFR to VFR. Windy will be MVFR to VFR. Now Isabel will go MVFR to VFR in the afternoon, and then Mentasta also the same trend, MVFR to VFR. VFR day for Tanita and also for Portage. Looking for VFR conditions for Chilkoot and White Pass as well. Now let's take a look at your freezing levels for tomorrow morning. Basically, we're seeing the surface level along the Bering Strait dropping down through the Kenai Peninsula and just draped across the northern Gulf to the southeast. Now we have a 2,000-foot level along the central areas of the state down to the southeast, slowly climbing to 6,000 feet across the western areas of the state. The heights are a little bit lower on the western Bering, and they climb as you head towards the eastern Bering, with the highest areas over the Alaska Peninsula increasing to 8,000 to 10,000 feet as you head back into the Pacific. Now let's take a look at the main concerns for icing tomorrow. Above 4,000 feet to 8,000 feet across the Bering waters, just light icing in this case. And along the eastern areas of the state, expect above 4,000, like I said, just along the eastern perimeter there. Now here's the amplitude of the jet stream for tomorrow, a large ridge that's amplified and is now centered across the eastern Bering. That jet is running about 120 knots. And here's the stack system with high pressure sitting along the Bering Strait. We see offshore flow developing tomorrow with a southerly flow on the backside of this high pressure system at 9,000 feet. Taking a look at the lower levels at 3,000 feet, high pressure is centered over the state. Offshore flow is going to be gustiest along the coastal conditions. So main areas of turbulence are going to be across the Gulf Coast and the Cook Inlet and possibly up there in the northwest. Now in just a moment, we'll be back with your marine forecast.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined once again by the science liaison of Dehne, Eric Stevens. Dehne, of course, is the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And Dehne is all about satellites, and Eric is always here to tell some really cool stuff about satellites. Now, the last time you were here, we talked about how the weather satellites can see clouds and what's under the clouds, but you're telling me that satellites can do a lot more, even protect the general public with aviation safety information.
That's right. There's one particular aspect of satellites we're going to talk about today that might not be immediately obvious, and that is detecting things in the atmosphere that are not clouds, that are not snow, not rain, but rather a hazard that can happen here in Alaska, and that is volcanic ash.
Of course.
When a volcano goes off, puts ash in the air, this is of course a hazard to the public if the ash were to fall on the ground in accumulating amounts.
Sure.
Additionally, while the ash is in the air, and this is the more frequent hazard, is it's a hazard to aviation because you cannot fly an airplane into volcanic ash without great risk. Worst case scenario, the ash gets into a jet engine, wrecks the engine, kills the engine, and now you have an airplane flying with no engines. It won't fly for long. So aviators need to avoid that ash. How do you avoid the ash? You have to know where it is by identifying it with a satellite image and perhaps predicting then where the ash will flow with the overall weather patterns. Satellites are so important for identifying when a volcano goes off and then tracking the ash after the volcano injects the ash into the atmosphere.
Now, are you talking about seeing the heat signature or a huge volcanic plume with a cloud that we're used to seeing in the really pretty pictures of any Alaska volcano that's erupted recently, Redoubt, for example? Or are we talking about the really fine details? Because this is polar orbiting satellites, the ones that are very low to the ground, right?
The geostationary satellites can do some detection. The polar orbiters, like you say, they're closer to the Earth. They give the even better view. In answer to your question, I would say all of the above.
Oh, okay.
A heat signature from a volcano going off with all the heat that comes with the eruption, that can be identified in infrared imagery.
Okay.
We've got images from the Kamchatka Peninsula. That's the far eastern part of Russia on the western side of the Bering Sea, loaded with volcanoes.
Right.
You know, Alaska has plenty of volcanoes of its own. We can also be affected when a volcano goes off in Kamchatka, say, and then the weather carries that ash toward Alaska from the west.
Right.
You can see the infrared heat signature, like you say. Also, the ash in the air can be detected by doing some sophisticated channel differencing within the satellite data. You can find the identification of sulfur dioxide, say, that's a component of the volcanic emission, and you can trace this with the satellite imagery. Sometimes volcanoes go off that haven't gone off before, and we're not expecting them to go off. Say if there's no seismometers around a given volcano that hasn't gone off in 100 years, you might not be expecting it to go off. In the satellite imagery, since satellites can be globally comprehensive, that might be the first sign that you have that a volcano in an unexpected area is going off.
So it's a good backup system. Okay.
Right.
Wow.
Right. And people are working all the time on automating the interrogation of satellite data by computers to provide a first alert to a human. So the software will say, we think this might be important. Human, go take a closer look. Because the people are still the best way to interrogate the imagery, but the planet's a big place, and we can't be looking everywhere all the time. So the software helps give a first cut. And then in Alaska, there's a special kind of surprise angle where the satellites are helpful, and that is The Katmai eruption of 1912. Huge eruption. There is still somewhat of a moonscape out there in southwest Alaska where all this ash is laying on the ground. And sometimes a strong weather pattern comes along where we have roaring northwest winds that go across the Alaska Peninsula there and can actually pick some of this ash up off the ground. No volcano is going off. This was more than 100 years ago that volcano actually blew. So you're not going to see a heat signature like we were discussing. There will be no seismic signature of a volcano going off. So those data sets, they'll say, oh, no problem. But you can see in some of the satellite imagery this ash, as it's called, resuspended. When the wind comes along, picks it up, the ash can be lofted a few thousand feet in the air just with the wind. And an airplane flying into that plume is exposed to some danger. So we need to track that ash to provide guidance to aviators that you don't want to be flying here at these elevations in this area. We've got some imagery of the resuspension, and you can see the wind blowing strongly from the northwest, picking up the ash and blowing it down to the southeast. And so that's another, perhaps not immediately obvious hazard of volcanic ash. Katmai is the gift that keeps on giving, for sure.
Very good. So we've got satellites that can help us understand the weather from the past and the immediate past. And we talked last time about how that's feeding into the forecast modeling to help improve predictions. But now they're also protecting the general public with aviation-sensitive information and watching volcanoes, whether they're erupting or maybe have erupted in the past, and finding the left-behinds from those volcanic events there. So really impressive stuff. Eric, thanks so much for joining us again today. And you're a gift that keeps on giving from the satellite community, so thanks a lot, and we hope to have you back again soon. Again, Eric Stevens with Dehne at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And if you'd like to check out any of the information that Eric has shared with us again today, you can do that very easily by going to www.dehne.alaska.edu. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
All right, on to your spooky ice forecast now. Let's take a look at the ice edge across the north coastal areas. The areas along Barrow and east, we're seeing some ice, we're seeing some shore-fast ice. So that is the biggest change as we headed through the next few days. Expect the ice conditions to continue along the north coast and growth along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. Now across the northwest coast back towards the Bering Strait, we're not expecting much growth at this time as they have southwest flow becoming more westerly as we head into Thursday. Now let's take a look at the southeast. As we head into tomorrow, that offshore flow will develop and we'll see some very strong gusty winds across those inner channels. So basically we're seeing gale criteria winds across much of the area or small craft between 25 to 40 knots, and looking at seas across the inner channels between 5 and 8 feet, across the outer waters looking at 10 feet. Your Thursday forecast, we're going to see some gusty conditions continuing, possibly tapering off late day for Thursday, but we're going to see those gusts up there at 45 knots across those inner channels, along with seas around 6 feet across the inner channels and 9 to 11 feet across those outer waters. Taking a look at the western areas of the Gulf and Prince William Sound, northerly offshore flow for the most part across the area between 15 to 25 knots. Strongest winds at the tip of the Kenai there. And we'll see seas on this day between 3 to 5 feet, primarily across the area, a little bit lower across the northern Cook Inlet. Let's take a look at your Thursday forecast. A change of wind direction there, becoming more southerly, between 10 to 15 knots, and seas on this day will be between 2 to 5 feet. Looking at your Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island forecast, we're going to see winds becoming northwesterly across most of the area, possibly a little bit more southwesterly across the northern areas of the Alaska Peninsula. Now, seas on this day will be higher across the Pacific side, between 4 to 6 feet, with 2 to 5 feet elsewhere. Heading into your Thursday forecast, shift of winds out of the south direction at 10 knots. Seas will be between 2 to 5 feet. For your Aleutians, we're going to see more of a easterly flow across much of the area on Wednesday and will become more southwesterly out towards the western Aleutians. Either way, 15 to 20 knots isn't bad for the Aleutian chain. Seas on this day will be between 6 to 7 feet on the Bering side, and then on the Pacific side between 7 to 16 feet. The highest seas will be out towards the western Aleutians. Now looking at your Thursday forecast, we'll see a shift of wind directions once again here, and we'll see primarily 15 to 20 knots across the area, except a little bit stronger out there towards Shimia, small crafts at 30 knots. And seas on this day will range between 6 to 9 feet across the area, a little bit higher seas out there towards Shimia again at 10 feet. And then for your west coast forecast on Wednesday, expect a southerly flow between 10 to 20 knots, and we'll see seas on this day between 9 to 15 feet, the highest seas out towards the northern Bering. Looking at your Thursday forecast, southwesterly flow primarily for the area, and we'll see seas on this day between 3 to 10 feet, highest seas out towards the northern areas of the Bering once again. Now the west coast, expect northwest coast and the north coast will see the stronger winds on Wednesday, strongest along the Kotzebue Sound. Chukchi Sea would be between 20 to 30 knots there. Freezing spray as you head across the eastern Beaufort seacoast. Cold conditions with seas between 4 to 6 feet, a little bit higher there towards the Bering Strait at 9 feet. On your Thursday, stronger winds fairly uniform across the area between 15 to 30 knots. So small craft advisories out there, and also be aware of the freezing spray along the north coast. Seas between 4 to 9 feet will be the pattern for your Thursday. Now let's recap your forecast. We're going to see ridging moving across the state tonight, freezing drizzle across the Fairbanks area, and the eastern Beaufort seacoast will see some blowing wind conditions. Also, we'll see some winds increasing across the southeast as we head into tomorrow morning with all the fog redeveloping statewide. Expect fog to reduce visibilities at times less than 1 mile. So be careful if you're out there trick-or-treating for this evening, because some of it's starting to develop already. As we head into your Thursday forecast, that ridging is going to be off to the east and south with some precipitation making it back to the west and northwest coast. Have a great Halloween.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.